Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Eileen Tito. I'm Director of Marketing at the Boca Raton Museum of Art. We are in for a treat tonight as we meet Adam Russell and Kelli Lever, husband and wife team that founded Key West Pottery over 10 years ago. You may have seen their work in our museum store. Today, we're going to take a drive down south over that 7-mile bridge to the southernmost part of the state to meet local artisans, potters, artists, and all around great people that are creating timeless yet modern and functional ceramics right in Key West. During this exclusive look into their studio and gallery, Adam and Kelli will share some insight into their world and even share a demonstration with us on the potter's wheel. They will answer your questions during this time, so we invite you to type your questions into the Q&A, and they'll answer them throughout the program. We'll try to get to as many as we can tonight, but for now, sit back, relax, and let's welcome Adam and Kelli. Hi, guys.
Hey, how are you? Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
What's happening? We are so pleased to be here with you tonight, Eileen, and Boca Raton Museum of Art, and everyone out there. The way that this is set up, and you'll have to excuse us, we're a little bit new to Zoom, but in this futuristic artist community, I'm super glad it's here. So I feel your presence, everyone out there in the world.
And welcome to our new studio. It's been a year in the making, and we are fully operational in here, and we're very excited to share it with you guys this evening.
Yeah, so we thought it would be kind of, I don't know, fun and probably necessary just to introduce ourselves as artists, as partners, both romantic and otherwise, with the story, the genesis of Key West Pottery. Really, as I say on our website, when I talk about it often, it's a love story. It's the love between this lovely person and myself, but it's also two people pursuing arts and culture for their whole life. In the day when I was a kindergartner, I was asked to draw a picture of what you want to be when you grow up. And for me, that was a stick man who had one of those kind of classic giant painting palettes and a beret on, because I knew from a long time, that to be an artist was really what I was called into. And I kind of pursued that pretty much for my entire adolescence, and ended up in art school at the Columbus College of Art and Design, and then ultimately at the Bowling Green State University School of Art, where I met this lady.
Yes, so we have been together for 17 years, creating art and creating the life we want to live. And along the journey, about 11 years ago, it brought us down to Key West, where Adam had an opportunity with a nonprofit organization on the island called the Studios of Key West, where he had a month-long residency. And during that month, we fell in love with the island and the people and the culture, and it stuck. And we went back to Ohio for that December
2 months, yeah.
for 8 weeks, and we sold everything and packed our tiny van and moved down with our 3-year-old, who is now 14, and I was pregnant with our second son, who is now 10. And that's kind of also was the birth of Key West Pottery. It's taken many forms over the years on the island. And we're very blessed to do what we love and to share our art and our inspiration with all of you. So thank you, everybody. I can't see all of you, but I can in my heart. So thank you guys for joining us this evening. You're in for a little treat. I wore my white pants as a challenge, so he can't get the brown clay on my pants.
I said we may have to opt for one of those plexiglass barriers, because I don't know how possible this is going to be.
The basic style.
Right. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, There's also a question and answer. If anybody has any questions that they would like us to address as we go, feel free to write in there, and I'll be able to kind of, you know,
She's going to moderate.
Moderate it.
We just one couple sentences further about Key West. Key West is an island all the way at the end of the archipelago of the Florida Keys. So we are, I would say, probably about 200 miles southwest of Boca Raton. It's connected with a string of bridges, but this is the very, very end of the road. So our island is 2 miles by 4 miles. There's about 25,000-ish permanent residents. And of course, many, many, many tens of thousands of visitors a year. And so for a long time, the gallery is still located on Duval Street, which is our mile-long kind of main drag that starts in the Atlantic Ocean and 1 mile later terminates in the Gulf of Mexico. For a long time, I'd be throwing pots in the window on Duval Street, which is a great kind of little piece of intrigue. People are very interested in this process. There's something ancient about it. We recognize what's happening, and it's also just kind of fun to watch. So that being said, I had to kind of cut my teeth in front of people throwing pots. And one of the skills I have is I can kind of shuck and jive while I'm working. So we thought it would be kind of fun just to be conversational. And if you guys have questions about anything, materials, theories of art, history, projecting into the future, art business, shape making, so on and so forth, please just let us know. Type it in. Miss Kelly's going to read it. She'll whisper in my ear. I'm going to be all messy. But I'm going to start up on the potter's wheel here. For those that don't know, this is an automatic potter's wheel, so I'm not kicking anything underneath. There's no pedal. I often joke that in terms of being a potter, the 20,000-year history of this art form, we do some pretty light lifting in terms of what the ancient potters were doing, figuring out this highly, highly scientific material, refining it, glazing it, firing it just right. That's been worked out for about 20,000 years. And so what we get to do is really experiment on the forefront of aesthetics, shape, design, fine art sometimes. And more than anything, it's just fun. It's functional, utilitarian work. So what I have here for my pottery heads out there is cone 6 stoneware. I use a stoneware that's got a lot of grog in it. And for those that don't know, grog is like sand, tantamount to sand. It's a very gritty clay. It's what I prefer. That structure kind of helps me get my shapes. And so I kind of thought maybe I would start by first just centering the clay, which is the most important part of this whole process. And for many, it's the most difficult part, but I've had some practice here. So what I always tell people about centering is it's not about the strength in your arms, it's the weight of your body. And when I lean on this clay with my whole body, I can get it to do not anything I want, but very, very close to it.
Someone just asked where we're located. They came in late. We're in Key West, Florida. So we're at the end of the road. We're about 90 miles away from Cuba.
Yeah, about 92 miles north of Havana is where we're at. Way out here. So you guys, I make a lot of pots, and I always tell people that even though the process seems and feels even kind of serene, right? Soothing, that's what people always tell me. I always want to remind potters and anyone interested in trying, which I would highly encourage you to do so, that it's actually a really assertive process. You have to know here what you want first. and you have to go for it rather quickly, actually, because as I add water, that's what's off screen here. I just don't want it in your way. As I add water to lubricate, it also weakens the clay. So every time you see me touch this clay, it's getting weaker, which means obviously that I have to get there quick. And so throughout the evening, I'm just throw a couple of pots, a couple of different forms. For my design nerds out there, you'll notice that I'm really drawn to modern forms. And modern meaning the period of design post-war, especially in America, but also throughout Europe and many places. But these kind of juxtapositions of curves and corners. So a lot of the times I'm going to use a corner that's actually the negative space of the shape. And that, as kind of idiosyncratic as that sounds, that's really the job that we have as potters, is that we are trying to identify.
Sorry.
What was that?
Eileen, am I missing the Q&A? I'm not seeing them pop up on the bottom.
There's two tabs. There's a chat tab and a Q&A. There's a couple in the Q&A, and I can read it for you if you like. Well, first, Greg says he loves you and will always be your biggest fan. So sweet,
Aww.
Greg.
Love and respect.
And then Bill had a question. He said, does your clay come from specific parts of the country or region, or is it a common type of clay?
That's an excellent question. I would say, at risk of obviously, being wrong if there's some potter in clay native regions, I would say most potters like Kelli and I are using clay that is essentially mixed by a chemist at this point. It's very, very well thought out in terms of formula and clay types. So it's not like they're mixing test tubes back and forth, but they are certainly mixing types of clay from around the country. Kaolin, something we call Tennessee ball clay. They'll have these different, each constituent has its own properties, and intermixed, you can really pull out things like color, things like texture. I just saw someone asked about what temperature we fire to. That's a really important question. We have to fire, or we don't have to, we choose to fire to cone 6, which is about 2100 degrees, 2167 or so. And that's because we don't have natural gas on the island. So a lot of potters, especially in a traditional sense, would be firing in a kiln that actually has combustion happening, an open flame. And in an open flame environment, depending on your fuel, you can get very, very hot and do different effects, reduction, so on and so forth, where you're actually reducing the amount of oxygen in the kiln. But for us, down here at the end of the road, with not a whole lot of wood that's not protected environmentally and no natural gas, we use essentially like a giant toaster, right? This toaster gets really, really dang hot, but we have to pick clay that is of that accord. So the cone 6 stoneware, it is actually an aggregate of many different materials from all over the world, actually.
The other beauty of being a mid-range cone 6 for us is that we're actually both trained as painters. That's what our education is in. So we, over the years, have formulated a lot of like engobes and techniques of layering, kind of like the fish behind me here, if you can see it, where Adam has been experimenting with almost watercolor effects on the work, but that vibrancy is really achieved at that, even though it's 2160 or 80 something, the vibrancy in that color is able to be achieved still, versus like a cone 10 or a salt firing or things like that, where they're more, the temperature is a lot higher. So for us as painters, we really love that aspect of it.
And I think that Kelli really brings up a point that I guess is so fundamental to what we do that I sometimes can look right past it, is that having been trained in the brush, fine art painters. That remains such a big part of our work. And although we have done well as potters and will continue to be potters for a long, long time, the painting aspect, the decor, and that is such an intense part of our thesis that it really starts to kind of come back in the back door with some of the work where I get sculptural, because it's actually me making a pot and then drawing on it and then sculpting in again. So absolutely crucial. Can't believe I forgot.
But this clay is the one he's using right now, has so much grog, like he was saying earlier, in it that versus like a porcelain, which is a very, very fine, or even like some stonewares are very smooth, soft clay bodies, where the grog gives it the structure where he can carve right in, and it will hold and it won't crack, and it will he can kind of play with the materials more because of it. Was there other questions too, Eileen?
Yeah. So do you tool the bottom of your pots, and where do you get the clay? This is a couple questions from Barbara.
Yeah. Thank you, Barbara. I do tool the bottom of the pots. Sometimes, for instance, we will make the shape. This is kind of one of my classic shapes. I'm going to try it in front of you, but I'm nervous, so don't make fun of me. This shape would be really hard to turn over and tool in a foot. So what Barbara means, for those who may not know, is many times after this, I just made this pot, and so it's still very wet, but tomorrow morning, I will use like a knife on this while it's spinning on the wheel, and I'll just shave off some of the dead weight, and I'll get my vectors really tightened in. What I mean by vector is just this shape is exactly what I'm going for, but it could use a little trim up. It could, just get a little straightened up here. And on the bottom, we typically have extra weight that could be removed. So to answer Barbara's question, for a shape like this, I actually throw the bottom extremely thin to begin with, because I already know that flipping this pot over, it's going to snap right here. And that is kind of the virtue of this shape, and the virtue of a lot of my shapes is that I like to make it look hard, So for that, Barbara, what I would do is just kind of dome the bottom in. I just use a rib, and I'll just kind of dome it in. I'll still sign the pot down there. It still hits the table with as little surface area as possible. That protects both the antique heirloom tables of the world, but also the pot itself. We want these pots to have just the minimum amount of touch, because they're really supposed to be out in the world in this three-dimensional sense. Kelly's going to show you.
Yeah, here's a great example too. He definitely does, and if you can see the thickness, I know it's probably hard on Zoom, but it's a nice, actually very thin, consistent bowl. But this is one that he would flip over onto the wheel head and trim that nice the deep foot. It also elevates the piece too, so the bowl won't just run into the table. It kind of adds a little bit of a pedestal or a lift, and it kind of visually creates lightness. Yeah.
And that's what I like to really consider with the shapes. This is what we call negative space, right? This bowl, we could make it look like a dog dish if we wanted to. It's very, very stable. It's not going to knock over as easily, but to produce something elegant and fine, we're really trying to consider what's not there. And in fact, that's the whole thing about pottery, right? Is that the value of the pot, and this gets a little philosophical, but so do potters. The value of the pot is the emptiness inside of it. It's all about encapsulating some space, and sometimes these spaces hold food, they hold water, they hold drink and coffee. Sometimes they hold ideas. Sometimes they hold your cultural aptitude that you're displaying for others in the world. That's how I know my work has meaning. And Kelly's work has meaning. It's that people have done this ever since. This is the beginning. So in that way, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, you're okay.
In that way, I think it's cool that we're not necessarily trying to do something new. It's that we are continuing an ancient continuity. And I say that often, some have probably heard me say that before, but I think it's really such a cool concept. And I kind of always done this.
Well, and I think to also build off of that, like documenting also as well, you know, for me, I love to paint on the plaques. I often steal some of his beautiful forms to paint on. But I kind of look at my work as documenting nature. Like I often paint things that are around me. And I think that one day, thousands of years from now, our culture is going to be documented by these pieces, and those pieces will still be here. They may be in shards, but it's kind of a beautiful thought to think that later on, you know, if there is no more mangoes on Earth or no more, you know, whatever it is, that that there's that thought was captured, that image was captured.
It's so true. And speaking of continuity, Grace has a question.
Yeah.
She says, hello guys, Cleveland Institute of Art student here. I'm majoring in illustration and pursuing a minor in ceramics. I adore your methods of decoration. I'm curious as how you balance experimentation and production. Do you sketch things out at first or work spontaneously? That's a great question, Grace.
Yeah, definitely a great question. Balance is key in life in general. And, you know, it takes a lot of experimenting. It just really does. Like figuring out what works, what doesn't work, you know, and building off of that for sure. And sketching out, I think, is a huge part of it. You know, they say things take, to master something, it takes 10,000 hours or 10,000 tries. So just like ceramics is so diverse in that it's not just throwing the pot on the wheel, but the finishing as well, you know, and that could make or break the piece, just depending, because it is kind of experimenting. But being painters, trained as painters, we do often sketch onto the pots and then layer and use all different types of engobes and you know, paintable glazes and dip glazes, and we've kind of over the years sort of developed some formulas that work and lots of formulas that didn't work as well.
You know, I would say I really appreciate your question, Grace, and it's hard to answer because, as you know, the idea has to start here, right? That's where the idea begins, and it can start to sketch, but something really magical happens when you put material to paper, whether it's pencil, on your computer, with the clay, whatever. And I heard this metaphor one time, and I just thought it was brilliant because it instantly hit me as being true. Even when you're writing, if you grab your pencil, right? And as soon as you put the pencil on the paper, you can feel the paper, you feel the texture of the paper. And what you're doing is you're actually extending your consciousness from your hand outside the borders of your body and to the end of the pencil. And in that access and that gaining of territory, essentially, that for me is where the magic happens. And so sketching is valuable in that way, in the doing, right? Because I have so many ideas, I can just think and think and think and think and think, but it's not worth a damn unless we can introduce it to the world and somehow bridge that gap between the ethereal, the world of ideas, whatever that is, wherever they come from, and make it real and harness its power. And then, you know, as you probably know, as a painter, part of the joy of painting, for me at least, is making a mess. Because the mess.
He loves to make a mess.
Yes. I'm a terribly messy artist. Anyone who knows me knows that's true. But a lot of magic happens from that. And that is indeed a sketch in and of itself. So if you were to come into my studio, you probably wouldn't see formal sketching. I was trained to do it that way, to actually sketch things out like the old masters did. They weren't wrong. It's a wise thing to do. But for me, I'm a little bit more spontaneous. But I consider that a sketch too. So I think that there's a nice marriage of both philosophies within our practice. We have some things that we know work, and then I have some things that I think will work, and just go for it.
So we have another question that's a little bit more related to the production. Cassie wants to know, how do you guys manage what you're throwing and quantities? Do you have an intention going into the month or the week?
Yes and no. It's definitely, our business grew very organically. And, you know, there's things that work and we know work, and things that we'll just continue to make. We have a staff, and we do make production wares. We use slip cast process for a lot of that. Adam makes the original, and then we cast plaster molds, and then pour, slip, and then typically hand finish, always hand finish all of them. You know, it's very supply and demand. As far as our gallery is actually located on Duval Street, which is the main street in Key West, and we're open 7 days a week. I personally am in there 3 days a week right now. We have an assistant that's been with us for years, Victoria. If you've ever been in the gallery, you've probably met her. We love her. And she's there 4 days a week. She keeps it open on the weekends for us. And it's really kind of organic as far as production schedule. But yes, there are definite items that we know keep up with.
I think that's a great question. I think it's probably coming from someone, because I remember asking this question a couple years ago. Because, you know, there's no real map about what you're supposed to do, right? There's no one who can tell you what you're supposed to do. I'm like, am I supposed to be a production potter? Am I supposed to be a fine artist? And you know what? All of that stuff works itself out over time. But for us, what we really had to do is look into our own business. And we realized that our business really, for the first, I would say, probably 7 or 8 years, was all predicated on the idea that people are just walking by. We chose a really nice place to open. We made a nice gallery. We're trying to build it up, and but it's like people are just walking by. These aren't people who are coming specifically for us. Now more than ever, but even still, it's such an awesome survey of humanity and their reaction to arts, specifically modern craft, design. There's some things that we make in the gallery that are challenging. There's a lot of things that are in the gallery that are coffee mugs and so on and so forth. As we said earlier, we have a family to support, staff to keep going, and some kind of real world expenses for artists. And so that is really a great predictor of what I'm going to do in the studio for the week. Is you can never have enough of the work for people to choose from, because that's the joy. When people really connect with the work, they want to see the options and the different idiosyncratic type of effects of the glaze and so on. So each piece is indeed unique, even though Kelli and I and our number one man, Russ, amongst a few other artisans, we produce around 5,000 mugs a year. And as you can see, I'm really interested in some of this other work too. So there is quite a balance that you have to strike about what to make, when to make it. And it's pretty much dictated by, you've got to have it. When people want something, they don't want to wait. So, Kelli says organic, but she keeps me in order.
Yeah, we kind of balance each other well in that way. As far as I personally love production. I love the repetition. It's kind of meditative for me. Sorry, I'm trying to read the comments too, but it's hard for me to see in the chat as well. So I apologize if I've missed anything. Sometimes if they're longer, I can only see a little section of it. I figure you don't want my fingers up in your face. So
no worries, I'll read them to you. No worries.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Eileen.
No
but
problem.
But we balance each other well. You know, production is, Adam does it. A lot of times he makes the original, and then Wes and I really put it into motion. And for me, that's, like I said, my meditation. It's something I can just do, and I can, you know, he always makes fun because he'll come in and I'm not listening to music or anything. It's just sort of my time to think and decompress. And it's something about the motions that I go through that I love, where Adam's very much the opposite. You ask him to make 100 of one thing, and by 10, he's over it, which is great because we need that too. And I think that keeps our work, and by him thinking that way, pushes me. And I think I need that because I can easily get stuck in certain motions, you know? So I think the fact that he's always doing something new and something different, and coming up with these ideas and creating so freely, it's really a blessing, I think, to have both.
Now we have that on recording, right?
Yeah. I did say it.
So friends, the heat gun here, or the torch, this adds a little bit of tensile strength back to my clay. So as I was telling you earlier, the clay weakens actually fairly rapidly as I'm working with it. And maybe you guys noticed a second ago that like this kind of area of the pot was kind of bobbling around, right? It's because, you know, I'm starting to get a little weak here. But if I heat it up, and you may even see some steam escaping, that's actually the water evacuating, and we get the strength back from the clay. That's not, I'm often asked, is that how you fire it? Do you still need a kiln? This is a very, very temporary situation, and it will liquefy again very quickly. But for complex forms, for any of my potter friends out there, keep your torch right there. And I do recommend a torch as opposed to a heat gun. You know, there's, what do they say? You know, with great power comes great responsibility. It's not as safe as a heat gun, but it's like pinpoint accuracy. I also have a great big torch for when I'm making really, really large pots, just because it's really essential. As potters, what we're doing is managing the moisture in this clay constantly. We're managing its center, we're managing obviously its shape, but the moisture is, you know, basically the one cogent fact that will change this from a formless glob of mud until eventually we're going to manage the moisture and the heat content so thoroughly that we're going to chemically change its formula into a ceramic material. So that's the difference between clay and ceramic, is that you can add water to your coffee mug all day long. It's never, ever, ever going to turn back to clay. So that has to do all with heat, management of water, and so on. Which is why, I don't know if you guys can tell yet, but I'm the philosophical one here. Which is why I always like to think about, we're managing the, you know, these kind of four primordial elements, you know? Earth, which seems obvious, water, which seems obvious, air, which is how we dry the clay, and then I guess the most obvious of all is fire, because about 2 weeks from now, this very pot that I am throwing before you, unless I mess it up, will dry, have gone through subsequent layers of, or subsequent levels of dryness. Some of them workable, some of them not, but it will dry to the point that it's what we call bone dry. Then we'll put it in the kiln. A lot of amateur potters and hobbyists, you always hear them say, oh, I made this great pot and then it blew up. Water, of course, turns to steam at, 210 degrees or so. And when it turns to steam, it expands very rapidly and it literally explodes. Not a fireball explodes, but your pot will disintegrate. That's why when people ask, how long does it take to make? It's a really hard question to answer because it's not a sequential process. You know, we are just making all type of things every day, all the time. And for that reason, there's always something at the appropriate stage for the day's work, whether it's glazing, whether it's loading kilns, unloading kilns, making new work, so on and so forth.
Is there some more, Eileen?
We've got a whole bunch, you guys.
Yeah.
All right,
Some really
cool,
good
cool,
ones.
cool.
Well, just a comment from Jody. It says, I was first introduced to your work at the Boca Raton Museum of Art Museum store.
All
Yay!
right.
Yeah, and it says, I love your work and your personalities are really expressed through your details and finishing glazes.
Oh, thank you.
Jody.
We really, really appreciate it. Come see us. You're just up the road if you're in Boca.
Yeah, and then we have a couple technical ones. It says, when tooling with that much grog, what do you do with the pitting?
You know what? That's an excellent question. And for anyone who may be confused by that, with a lot of grog, and this is actually a tile clay, so it's got a lot of grog in it. And I came across this clay originally so that I could do big things, 6 and 8 feet tall and so on, because it really ends up giving you a lot of strength. However, it may not be the coffee mug you want to drink out of in the morning, right? We use a porcelain for that because it's a much finer particulate. So the question is indicating that as I'm trimming the pot, the kind of the sandy particles will just tear out, and it doesn't leave an entirely smooth surface. And there's a couple of different techniques for mitigating that. One is what I'm doing right now. I'm actually trimming this pot while it's on the wheel, and it's still painfully wet, right? Like it is still so wet. But I can remove a lot of the extra weight so that trimming tomorrow is much easier. And then the other thing that I do often, I knew I wasn't going to trim tonight, so I don't have my trim tool with me, but I will take my trimming knife and I'll turn it backwards. And so I just have a flat piece of the metal handle, basically. Some people use a spoon, some people use a stone, and you can just quickly burnish. Burnishing is when you apply a hard, flat surface to the clay, and it actually flattens out the surface of the clay, and you can get this really beautiful luster. It's really beautiful, it's almost glaze-like. In fact, Native American pottery from the Southwest, a lot of it is only burnished because that process can so thoroughly seal the pot that you actually don't need to glaze it. It'll be watertight as it is. So I use that too, nowhere near the expert of burnishing, which is an art form in and of itself, but that kind of helps me get rid of those little pits. And you're right, we do get them.
And then another question from Emily is, what weight is the clay that you're throwing?
Emily, I need to get better about that. I never weigh my clay out. I make all one-of-a-kinds, right? So if you were to say, oh my gosh, that pot, like I need 3 of them matching exactly, I can get pretty close, right? And if I were going to set out and really make 3 identicals, I would weigh out the clay. But since that's not my intention, I really don't weigh out that much. So I can only ever offer guesses. I know a lot of student potters find it super helpful. I would say that I've made this out of approximately 7 pounds of clay, 8 pounds of clay.
Not to interrupt, but the 4 that are wet in the back, wasn't that one? That was 25 pounds of clay between the 4, or there was 5?
Yeah, there's another one.
There was 5, so 25 divided by 5 pounds, 6 pounds each. We get our clay in 25-pound bags. So that those he threw this morning, and he had mentioned, that's 1 bag. So that kind of gives you an idea there.
Yeah, and really that's kind of how I estimate it. I just look at how much of the chunk of clay I'm taking. So, I do think for people who are, I guess, probably more disciplined than I as potters, I think it's really important to measure out your clay if you're making identicals. And when I see that, and you see it, when you're kind of have this niche interest like me, I see my friends even around the world sitting in front of a table, and I kid you not, there is 400 identical pots on it. That is astounding to me. And I pushed myself in that direction for a little bit and realized that's not where my passion's at. But I admire it so much. I mean, how better a way to learn something than to do it 400 times in a row? I mean, essentially, that's the only way you can learn something. But to do it 400 sequential times, it's amazing. All right, again.
Is there another one, Eileen?
Yep, Nahal has a question for you. It says, love your sculptural pelican and fish pieces. Are those a combination of hand building and wheel?
They are mostly wheel thrown components in combination. I just love the wheel. It kind of makes me feel all right with the world. You know what I mean? Not that I was troubled beforehand, but um, I kind of sometimes I explain this as like when you see these weird shapes, you know what I mean? It's actually like a frozen thought, right? We're creating these messy shapes. We're just drawing it in 3 dimensions out of nothing. And I find that process deeply inspiring. But to attach these different shapes together, not only can we start to get, for instance, like a pelican, we can start to get something like the pelican going. But if I were to set out and sculpt a pelican out of stone, I would try to make it look real. I don't know why. That's just who I am. But when I'm using the thrown pots, the aesthetic, the decisions are actually dictated by the process. And this is what I was saying earlier too with the sketching. There's a magic in that, right? It's like there's plenty of ways we can look at pelicans. We can take a beautiful photograph of a pelican. But for me to get into it this way, I just feel so much more magical in that creation process. So for me, I throw all the components on the wheel. I've seen a couple of other artists recently who also do, but for a long time I didn't see that around, and which means nothing. It's probably just my ignorance or lack of looking. But I can recognize their process because I see the symmetry, I see the throwing lines, and I see the compositional decision-making process that has to take place in order to do that. And so it's all about timing too. You know what I mean? It's all about how to catch the clay at just the right moment to attach it so that you can still manipulate it afterwards. Excellent question, though.
So we have a couple questions here about your painted pieces, and I'm not sure if you have any nearby that they would like to see some more painted pieces if you have any near you. But they also wanted to know if you've used any natural pigments. That was Tatiana's question. And then another attendee asked about if you've done anything with airbrushing with your glazes.
Yeah.
So just three questions all asking about color.
Yeah,
Out of
cool.
the way so that they can see the fish
Well,
behind.
grab your lemon fish too, because you can bring it up next to the camera. Those are excellent questions. A lot of the pigments that we encounter in ceramics are of natural origin because you can never paint this with paint and put it in a kiln because the paint would just vaporize. The kiln is way too hot. This is actually more akin to glass making. So your pigmentation and your chemistry really has to be activated by the heat. So for instance, the green glaze that we use often, that when Eileen comes back on the screen, you'll see she's surrounded by a couple of pieces that we have up in the museum store there. That green glaze is actually a copper glaze. So copper in an oxidative state, so out in oxygen, turns green, like the Statue of Liberty, for instance, or an old penny. That's what we named our glaze, Old Penny Modern. However, so copper is a natural material, to answer the question directly. But if you were to take that glaze or that ingredient, copper, and put it in a kiln and then cut the oxygen off in the burning kiln, like a gas kiln, that fire becomes so hungry for oxygen, which is needed for burning, that it will go into the copper oxides and pull the oxides out. And that same vase would turn red. It's actually a really beautiful, deep, cherry, lustrous red is copper red. So this is what I was saying before, is that in the deep, deep history of ceramics, a lot of these things had to be figured out from natural materials. Now, of course, we have some pretty advanced technological way of making glazes. And in the studio here, there's glazes we formulate. There's glazes I buy outright, totally commercial. There's slips. There's a number of ways to layer effects. And for me, since Kelli and I are essentially self-taught, nothing is out of bounds. And I really think that's one of the virtues to our work, is that since I didn't learn from one specific tradition, which in some ways has handicapped me because I've had to learn wherever I could. But since I didn't have one thing to make allegiance with, nothing is off the table. So that's kind of our method. And Kelly's got something that she could show you a close-up of.
Yeah, so this one came out of the kiln the other day. It's cracked. See, we too have failures, but you can kind of see the technique of layering. You know, we use a lot of mason stains that I have formulated like a slip base that we add the mason stains to. And then we layer with all different kinds, like Adam said, of all materials. It's fun to just kind of play. So this one was finished, you can kind of see, and then I'm working on a few more today, doing some orange blossoms. So this one you can see is still totally matte. Hasn't been fired yet. It just has the glazes and the drawing on there. You can still see some of the pencil marks in there that will burn off in the kiln. And then it's all coated with a wax. So I'm ready to put on the glaze, the final background. So the piece will be fully functional, totally sealed, but still achieving that color and pattern as well.
That's so great. Thank you so much, you guys. We have time, I think, for like one last question. And there's still so many questions, but we do have a couple of folks asking about like how much your style has been affected by being in Key West. Did you bring your style to Key West, or has it evolved? And then are there a lot of other potters in Key West or on Duval Street? Like, are you seeing a lot more artists popping up? So a couple different questions from Iris and Tahansky asking about Key West.
Yeah, perfect. So there are lots of artists in Key West. I think there used to be a few more potters. There were some really great potters, the Whitehead Street Pottery, Chuck and Tim. And when we first moved down 10 years ago, they were true potters. Like, they came to us and just like, we love them. They're great guys. They had been potting on the island since the 80s. They've since retired in the last 5 years or so.
Yeah. There was actually, weirdly enough, there is a decent amount of potters on the island, albeit in a different sense of just being pottery enthusiasts. There was an amazing, it still is, an amazing university-style program at the Florida Keys Community College, which is just right across the street here. And it was run by an artist who is now passed, but he had deep, deep connections into the art world. And so really, really famous ceramic artists, Paul Sottner and Boca and these different ones would come to the Florida Keys and give workshops in this university-style program, kilns everywhere, big, huge spaces, which we don't have very many of. And that tradition put a lot of kind of institutional knowledge into the community about ceramics, art history, process, and so forth. So that reservoir is there. There's not a ton of professional potters on the island because, it's a real hustle. It's a real hustle. We've been fortunate, and we work dang hard, you guys. And we've also gotten really lucky in a couple of ways too, that we always like to pass forward to anyone we can, in the same way that people pass their good fortune on to us when we were getting started, because we didn't start here. It was not like this back then. But as far as style, Key West is so influential on people that it influences your style even when you're only visiting. I mean, it just has this aesthetic, it has a smell, it has a feeling, when you're here, we're able to check out of what we call the big land, and Kelly and I are both from Ohio, and we love Ohio, and we love the big land. This is not about, whatever, being an expat or something like that. But there's a whole vibe to it down here. Now, that being said, Kelli and I both, throughout our career before this, specifically as painters and even back to students, we were really, really into the use of very bright color. And, to kind of circle back around to the other question, the airbrushing, for me, that came from actually quite an urban influence. Graffiti, and that was just the era that I went to painting school, and we all painted graffiti. It was just a major influence for me. But saturated color, color science, of really how to make a pink pop by putting it in front of a green, or vice versa. There's these different, fairly technical ways of using color that over time become intuitive. But we have really been doing that. And then you come down here and it's like you're living in that environment. Even the food and the fruit growing off the trees is as such, So it definitely influences. In my work too, when we get back to the pelicans and the fish and this and that, I really like to access the idea of totem. And, I think that artwork does not have to be interpreted as being spiritual or ancient or any, convention like that. However, to the artist, when I'm making a pelican, I'm also thinking about the character of that animal. And so down here, of course, 11 years ago, it felt quite exotic, to see these beautiful seabirds and sharks and, all type of things that I just basically wasn't accustomed to, but to also feel their power in my mind and in my heart, and let that come into the work. So I think that even more so than an aesthetic, the surroundings have deeply influenced the choices we make about what to depict. So.
I know that we're running pretty
We
close
are.
on time.
We are, you guys. This was so much fun.
Oh man,
I just
want
to say to anybody that wrote questions that we didn't get to, please go to our website, keywestpottery.com, and email us through there. It brings right to us, and we're not always the quickest at getting back, but I promise you we will, And if you're ever in Key West, come visit us on Duval Street. If you're in Boca, please check out the museum and the store there. We feel very blessed to have this connection and be able to do this and partner with such a great people and great organization. So Eileen, thank you for the opportunity.
Yes.
Thank you, guys. This is lots of fun. And yeah, feel free to email your questions either to the museum at info@bocamuseum.org or Key West Pottery. We'd be more than happy to get the answers for you. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to all of them, and you guys had such great questions. Maybe we can do this again another time. Yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but we do want to invite you to go by their gallery. It's right on Duval Street. I know you don't need an excuse to go to Key West, right? But definitely stop by. It's right on Duval Street, and a great day is coming up. It's Shop Small Saturday. So what a better day than that to support local artists. So we really encourage you to stop by there. You have their address here. Like I said, it's right on Duval, and keywestpottery.com is their website. And just a couple other reminders. We'd like to encourage you to consider becoming a member at the museum. We have some great things coming up for members, like Member Appreciation Days in the museum store from November 27th through January 3rd. Members will receive an additional 10% off their purchases. And we're going to be doing a free gift wrap for the holidays every Saturday. Our members receive lots of great benefits. They gain exclusive access and experiences that are just for members. You get free admission and discounts every day. And of course, you help to give back to the community and feel good about making an impact right in your local community. So you can join on our website, or feel free to just stop by the front desk and you can join there. Another reminder that we have for you is Museum Store Sunday. So right after Shop Small Saturday, it's Museum Store Sunday, and it's a great way to help support your local nonprofit. This is actually a worldwide initiative. It'll be the 4th annual Museum Store Sunday on November 29th. And that day, you'll get 20% off your entire purchase even these amazing Key West Pottery pieces. Free museum admission. You get a free museum store Sunday mask with your purchase of $50 or more, since mask is an essential right now. And we're also going to be doing curbside pickup. So if you see something you like and you've stopped by already, just give us a call. We'll take a phone order and we'll bring it right out to you from 3 to 6 p.m. on Museum Store Sunday. Of course, all COVID safety protocols will be in place just to make sure you have a fun and safe shopping experience. All right. And last but not least, if you've enjoyed this program and you'd like to contribute a donation, we'd like to consider that. All you need to do is text the word Boca Muse to 44321. And we appreciate your support. We appreciate you hanging out with us this evening and hope to see you again soon on another virtual event. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, guys. We appreciate all of you.
Thank you.